Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why the man who once couldn't go a single day without hearing your voice can now go weeks, even months, without saying a word to you? Why someone who clearly still feels something chooses silence over honesty? It's not because he's moved on, it's because you've touched a part of him that he can't face, the part that reminds him of everything he lost, everything he couldn't handle, and everything he still craves but can't admit. That silence you're hearing, it's not indifference. It's a confession he's too afraid to make. And ladies and gentlemen, sometimes the silence is louder than any message you could ever receive. You feel it, don't you? That gnawing question that lives at the back of your mind. If he misses me, if he thinks about me, if he still feels something, why doesn't he just reach out? Why doesn't he say something, anything? Because surely if he wanted to, he would. That's what we tell ourselves. But the truth is more complicated than that. Sometimes he doesn't contact you not because he doesn't want to, but because the very thing he wants most, he's terrified to face. And you see, when a man craves you deeply, when you've touched something in him that no one else has, it doesn't just make him want you. It exposes him. It reminds him of what he felt with you. And it also reminds him of what he lost. It forces him to look at his own reflection and see the version of himself he couldn't be when he was with you. And for some men, that truth is unbearable. It's easier to stay quiet than to confront the pain of what went wrong. It's easier to pretend he's strong than to admit that he still thinks about you when he's lying in bed at night. And silence, for many men, isn't strength, and it's self-preservation. It's the only way they can protect the fragile ego that doesn't want to be reminded of its mistakes. Becca says, used to contact you would mean to open the door to everything he's been trying to bury. The guilt, the regret, the vulnerability he once tried to hide. You represent both the beauty and the consequence of his choices. You are the living proof of what he couldn't handle, what he didn't fight for, what he let slip through his hands. But here's what you need to understand. His silence is not a reflection of your worth. It's not evidence that you didn't matter. It's not confirmation that what you had was meaningless. His silence is a mirror showing himself to himself. And if he can't face that mirror yet, it's because he's still trapped in the prison of his own pride. The truth is, a man can crave you with every fiber of his being and still stay away because he's afraid that one message, one call, one moment of vulnerability will undo the illusion of control he's worked so hard to build. And you think he's strong because he's not reaching out. But the reality is, it's weakness disguised as power. Because real strength is not pretending not to care. Real strength is admitting you do. Real strength is reaching out and saying, I miss you, even if it means risking rejection. But not everyone has that kind of courage. Not everyone has the emotional maturity to confront their own feelings honestly. And that's why some men will go silent. Not because you weren't enough, but because you were too much, too real, too powerful, too capable of awakening feelings they didn't know how to handle. And he doesn't contact you because deep down, he knows that the second he does, the wall he built around his heart will begin to crumble. And once that wall falls, he'll have to feel everything he's been avoiding, the longing, the regret, the loss. He'll have to admit that he let go of something rare. And that truth hurts far more than silence ever could. So instead, he hides behind in distractions. He tells himself he's moved on. He tells his friends he's fine. He keeps busy. But at night, when everything quiets down, he scrolls through your old messages. He replays old conversations in his mind. He revisits the last moments you shared. And even though he doesn't reach out, a part of him still hopes you'll reach out to him because that's easier. For you to break the silence, for you to take the first step so he doesn't have to face his own weakness. But here's where your power lies. You don't. You don't break the silence. You don't chase the closure. You don't hand him the comfort he hasn't earned. Because every time you choose silence too, every time you resist the urge to reach out, you teach him something. You teach him that your value isn't measured by his attention. You teach him that his absence doesn't define your presence. You teach him that real love isn't about who can play the game better. It's about who respects themselves enough not to play at all. And he may crave you, but craving is not the same as commitment. Wanting is not the same as choosing. He may want the feeling you gave him, the warmth, the admiration, the safety, but he may not yet be ready to give what it takes to sustain that feeling. Some men crave love, but run from the work it requires. They want the high without the honesty, the connection without the accountability, the comfort without the vulnerability. And when they meet a woman who demands depth, who reflects back to them their own immaturity, they retreat, they vanish. They convince themselves that silence equals power, when in truth it only exposes their fear. And he may think staying silent keeps him in control, but in reality it keeps him stuck. Because you can't heal what you won't confront. You can't grow while you're hiding from the truth. So his silence doesn't make him mysterious, it makes him lost. And that's something you cannot fix for him. You can't love him into clarity. You can to reach out enough times to pull him out of his own confusion. You can't make him see your value if he's still blind to his own. And what you can do is stand tall in your own worth. You can understand that silence, though painful, is information. It's showing you where he truly stands. It's showing you the difference between someone who feels something and someone who's ready to act on it. It's showing you the maturity gap, that what you need isn't someone who simply craves you, but someone who values you enough to step forward, even when it's uncomfortable. And you deserve someone who doesn't need to hide behind pride, someone who doesn't need to play emotional tug of war, someone who knows that communication isn't weakness, it's love in action. You deserve someone who understands that connection is built through courage, not avoidance. And so when you feel that sting of silence, remember, it's not rejection, it's revelation. It's showing you who's capable of standing beside you in the light and who's only comfortable loving you in the shadows. Let that clarity empower you. Let it harden your standards, not your heart. Because while he may crave you, you don't need to be consumed by someone else's craving. You are not waiting to be contacted. You are continuing to rise. You are evolving. You are learning that silence can be sacred when it comes from self-respect. And one day, maybe he will reach out. Maybe he'll send that message. Maybe he'll finally break his own silence. But by then, you'll have found peace in yours. You'll have realized that what you needed was never his validation. It was your own strength. You'll see that the silence that once hurt you actually healed you, because it forced you to stop waiting and start growing. It showed you that your life doesn't pause for someone else's hesitation. And so don't wait for him to contact you. Don't sit in the dark wondering if he still cares. Know that his craving is his battle to fight, not yours to fix. And while he's busy wrestling with his fear, you'll be out there living in your freedom. Because the most powerful thing you can ever do is not to make him speak, but to show him through your silence that you no longer need to hear from him to know your worth. And that's where the real transformation begins, not in the waiting, not in the hoping, but in the quiet decision to stop assigning meaning to someone else's silence. Because the truth is, silence can only hold power over you if you give it permission to. You could spend days, weeks, even months trying to decode the reason behind it, replaying conversations, reading between the lines of what wasn't said, analyzing every memory for clues. But the moment you decide to stop searching for reasons and start accepting reality, something shifts inside you. You begin to realize that the closure you've been craving isn't something that comes from another person. It's something you give to yourself. And you don't need him to explain why he disappeared. You don't need a text to validate what you already felt, because deep down, you already know. You know when someone has the emotional capacity to meet you halfway. You know when someone is running from what they feel instead of facing it. And once you truly accept that, you stop trying to rescue people from their own avoidance. You stop trying to fill the silence with your own energy. You start to see that sometimes silence is the most honest answer you'll ever get. And I know it hurts, because you didn't want silence. You wanted understanding. You wanted effort. You wanted to see that the connection mattered as much to him as it did to you. But that's the thing about emotional maturity, that not everyone arrives at it at the same time. Some people stay stuck in patterns where avoidance feels safer than honesty, where ego feels easier than accountability, where missing someone is easier than showing up for them. So they disappear, they stay quiet, ta-ta. Hey, convince themselves that distance equals peace, but peace doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from facing what's real. And that's something he still hasn't learned to do. And meanwhile, you're learning the art of letting go with grace. You're learning how to hold space for your emotions without letting them dictate your self-worth. You're learning that just because someone can't show up for you doesn't mean you're unworthy of being shown up for. You're learning that love isn't about chasing what hides. It's about aligning with what chooses you. And the moment you fully embody that truth, everything changes. The ache in your chest begins to soften. The anxiety of waiting for a message starts to fade. And slowly, your focus shifts from what's missing to what's possible. And you start reclaiming your time, your energy, your peace. You realize how much space that silence has been taking up in your mind. And you begin to fill it with things that bring you back to life. You start doing things that make you feel vibrant again. You rediscover parts of yourself that you had put aside while trying to understand someone else's confusion. You begin to remember what it feels like to be your own source of joy, your own comfort, your own safety. And that's when something powerful happens. The silence that once felt like rejection becomes the very soil from which your confidence grows. And because the truth is, silence teaches. It teaches you patience. It teaches you boundaries. It teaches you how to find strength in stillness. It shows you who's capable of communicating and who only knows how to withdraw. It shows you that love isn't meant to be proven. It's meant to be reciprocated. And when someone truly values you, they don't go quiet. They don't vanish when things get hard. They don't disappear into the shadows when emotions surface. They step forward. They talk and they listen. They fight for understanding. But when someone doesn't have the courage to do that, silence becomes their refuge and your revelation. And though it may sting, that revelation is your liberation because it frees you from illusion. It frees you from waiting on a version of someone that exists only in potential. It frees you to stop building your hope around who they could be and to start building your peace around who you already are. And there will be moments when you still feel that pull, that tiny part of you that wonders, what if he finally reaches out? And it's okay to have those thoughts. It's okay to miss the connection, to miss the feeling of being wanted. You're human. But you have to remind yourself, missing someone doesn't mean you should return to them. Craving closure doesn't mean you should sacrifice your peace to get it. You can miss what was and still move forward into what's better. You can hold compassion for someone and still hold boundaries for yourself. And he may crave you, but craving isn't love. It's desire mixed with fear. It's emotion without accountability. It's the wanting without the doing. You deserve the kind of love that doesn't hide when it gets uncomfortable. You deserve someone who doesn't need to lose you to realize your value. You deserve someone who doesn't run from the intensity of connection, but instead learns to grow through it. You deserve someone who doesn't stay silent when their heart is loud. And then here's what's so beautiful. When you reach that place within yourself where you no longer chase communication, you become magnetic. You start radiating an energy of self-respect that people can feel. You no longer operate from a place of lack. You don't need validation because you've already validated yourself. And ironically, that's often when the silence on his end becomes unbearable. Not because you did anything, but because your stillness reflects his avoidance back to him. Your peace becomes the mirror that forces him to see the chaos he's been running from. And he may think the silence protects him, but in time it exposes him. Because nothing eats away at the soul more than knowing you had something real and did nothing about it. He'll replay the moments he could have reached out. He'll wonder if it's too late. He'll remember your kindness, your laughter, the safety he felt around you, and he'll realize that silence cost him more than he ever expected. But by then, your silence will have transformed into strength. You'll no longer be the person waiting for the message. You'll be the person writing a new story, building a new chapter, walking with confidence towards something that finally matches your energy. And there's a quiet power in not responding to silence with desperation. There's a beauty in letting people feel the weight of losing access to your energy. Because not everyone deserves a front row seat to your heart. Not everyone has earned the privilege of your presence. And when you start seeing your love as something sacred, something that not everyone is entitled to, you begin to attract people who treat it that way. And so let his silence echo. Let it serve as the distance you needed to rise higher. Let it remind you that love should never feel like waiting. Love should never feel like confusion. Love should never require you to shrink yourself just to be noticed. The kind of love that lasts isn't the one that hides in silence. It's the one that speaks even when it's hard. And while he's still trying to figure that out, you'll already be living it. And because your story doesn't end where someone else stopped speaking, it continues every time you choose yourself over confusion, every time you choose peace over pain, every time you choose to move forward instead of looking back. That's where your growth happens. That's where your healing deepens. And that's where you discover the kind of strength that that doesn't need anyone's confirmation to exist. And one day, when you look back, you'll realize that his silence wasn't a loss. It was a redirection. It was the universe clearing space for someone who won't just crave you in silence, but will cherish you out loud. Someone who won't hesitate, someone who won't disappear, someone who understands that real love isn't about who can stay silent the longest. It's about who can communicate with courage. And by the time that person arrives, you'll be ready, not because you waited, but because you learned, because you grew, because you transformed that silence into strength, that waiting into wisdom, and that heartbreak into a higher standard for love. And then that's when the true lesson reveals itself, that love at its highest form is not about chasing what hides, but about standing still in your truth until what's meant for you has the strength to meet you there. Because you see, the silence you once feared becomes the silence that protects you. It shields you from half-hearted people, from temporary intentions, from those who crave your energy but aren't ready to honor your depth. It teaches you the difference between a man who is emotionally overwhelmed and a man who is emotionally unavailable. And once you've learned that difference, you'll never again confuse craving for caring. And when someone truly cares, they don't hide in the shadows, hoping time will erase their hesitation. They step forward. They risk discomfort. They communicate because connection matters more than pride. But for those who haven't yet matured into that awareness, silence becomes their safety net. It's not a calculated strategy. It's emotional avoidance. They think that staying quiet keeps them in control, but all it really does is reveal how deeply they're controlled by fear. Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of not being enough, or maybe even fear of being too seen. And that's why his craving stays trapped inside him. Because to act on it would require courage he hasn't yet developed. And meanwhile, your journey moves forward. You begin to understand that your power lies in not waiting for anyone to catch up to your level of emotional honesty. You realize that every time you resist the urge to reach out, you reclaim your power. Every time you choose peace over proving something, you elevate your standard. And that standard will start to attract everything that silence could never give you. Because life has a way of rewarding those who refuse to settle for half-hearted love. The moment you stop negotiating your value is the moment the universe begins aligning you with what truly matches it. But let's be honest, there will still be days when you feel the tug of nostalgia. There will be moments when the silence feels heavier than usual, when a song, a place, or a random thought reopens the memory of what once was. You might catch yourself wondering if he ever thinks of you, if he ever feels the same ache that once consumed you. And even though you won't admit it out loud, a small part of you will still wish for that message, that call, that simple acknowledgement that you mattered. But here's what you need to remember in those moments. You did matter. You still do. You just don't need to hear it to know it. And his silence doesn't erase the impact you had. It doesn't rewrite the connection. It doesn't invalidate the love you gave. It simply reveals that he wasn't ready to match it. You showed up fully, and that's something to be proud of, not ashamed of. You loved with honesty, and that's not weakness, that's bravery. The world tries to convince you that caring deeply makes you vulnerable to pain, but the truth is, caring deeply is your superpower, because only those who have the courage to feel deeply can also heal deeply. Only those who risk love fully can also rise from its absence with wisdom. And every heartbreak, every silence, very unanswered message becomes a sacred teacher. It teaches you how to communicate with yourself in ways no one else ever could. It teaches you what your boundaries are truly worth. It teaches you what it means to walk away not out of pride, but out of self-respect. You begin to see that you never lost anything by letting go. You gained clarity. You gained strength. You gained the ability to see beyond potential and into reality. Because love is not about seeing who someone could be. It's about recognizing who they are right now. And if who they are right now can't meet your emotional truth, then your silence is the loudest answer you'll ever need to give. And he may still crave you, but craving without action is just a form of cowardice dressed in longing. He might replay your laughter in his mind, imagine what it would be like to see you again, or picture what he'd say if he ever gathered the courage to reach out. But until he does, none of it matters, because the difference between missing you and deserving you lies in one word: effort. And you deserve effort. You deserve presence. You deserve consistency. And then that's why silence becomes the great revealer. It exposes who's truly ready to meet you where you stand. It filters out those who only want the idea of you from those who are ready to embrace the reality of you. The idea of you is easy to crave. It's beautiful, soft, safe. But the reality of you, the depth, the emotion, the truth, that takes strength to hold. And only those who are grounded within themselves can meet that kind of depth without running from it. And as you continue to grow, something powerful happens. Your silence starts to feel lighter. It stops being something you endure and starts being something you own. It becomes your language of power. You no longer need to fill the space with explanations, apologies, or overthinking. You realize that real communication doesn't always require words. Sometimes it's your absence that speaks the loudest truth. And that truth, H, is this: if you can't show up for me, you can't stay near me. And that kind of confidence is magnetic. It's not loud. It's not performative. It's quiet and deeply rooted. It says, I know what I bring to the table and I'm not afraid to eat alone. And that energy shifts everything. Because once you learn how to sit in your own silence without fear, you stop being drawn to people who disappear into theirs. You stop mistaking inconsistency for mystery. You stop falling for potential and start recognizing alignment. You stop waiting for the phone to light up because you're too busy lighting up your own life. And ironically, that's often when they come back, when you've healed, when you've rebuilt, when you've moved on. Suddenly the message arrives. Suddenly the silence breaks. But you won't feel the same pull you once did. You'll read their words, and instead of your heart racing, you'll feel calm, because by then you'll understand that their contact isn't a sign of growth, that it's a sign of realization. They're realizing too late what you already knew, that connection without courage doesn't last, that craving without action leads nowhere, that silence, while comforting for a while, eventually turns into regret. And then when that moment comes, you won't need to prove anything. You won't need to respond with anger or longing. You'll simply smile because you'll know that you've already healed from what they're just beginning to feel. You'll understand that your silence wasn't punishment. It was protection. You protected your peace. You protected your heart. You chose to stop pouring energy into someone who only offered uncertainty in return. And this is where true freedom lives. Not in being chosen by someone else, but in choosing yourself even when they don't. Because the greatest act of love you can ever give is not chasing someone to make them see your earth. It's standing so firmly in your own value that you no longer need to. You become your own validation, your own peace, your own home. And then when you live from that space, everything changes. You attract people who communicate with intention, who love with openness, who choose you without hesitation. You stop tolerating emotional half measures. You stop explaining why you deserve clarity. You stop negotiating for the bare minimum. Because once you've tasted the power of your own silence, you'll never again settle for someone who mistakes absence for strength. You'll only make room for those who understand that love requires presence, courage, and the willingness to show up, not when it's convenient, but when it matters most. And then that's when you start to understand that love, real love, was never meant to make you feel small. It was never meant to make you question your worth or leave you wondering whether you're too much or not enough. Love, in its truest form, is clarity. It's steady. It's certain. It doesn't vanish in silence or hide behind confusion. It stands up. It speaks. It shows. But when someone can't meet you there, when they disappear into their own fears and call it space, it's not your job to shrink yourself to fit their comfort. It's your job to honor what's true for you. And because the moment you start adjusting your light to match someone else's shadow, you lose the very thing that made you magnetic in the first place. You lose that spark, that boldness, that presence that made them drawn to you. And the irony is, the very reason he craves you is because of that light, the confidence, the warmth, the authenticity. But the moment you start chasing his silence, you dim it. You make his absence the center of your focus instead of making your own growth the center of your life. And I know that's easier said than done, because when someone once made you feel seen, it's painful to feel invisible to them now. When someone once made you feel understood, it's confusing to be met with silence. But here's the shift. Being unseen by them doesn't mean you've lost your visibility. It just means they've lost their vision. They can no longer recognize what they once had right in front of them. That's not a reflection of your lacks. It's proof of their blindness. And you were never asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person to meet you where they weren't ready to go. You were asking for depth from someone still swimming in the shallow end of emotional connection. You were asking for presence from someone still running from their own reflection. You were asking for love from someone who hadn't yet learned how to love themselves enough to stay. And that's why silence became their escape. Not because you were unworthy, but because you were their mirror. You reflected back everything they needed to confront within themselves. But here's what silence gives you. It forces you to build your own foundation. It forces you to rely on your own inner voice instead of their validation. It forces you to realize that the most powerful conversations you'll ever have are the ones you have with yourself. When you sit in that quiet and the world goes still, you begin to hear the parts of you that you once silenced for someone else. The parts that said, I deserve more than waiting. The parts that whispered, I'm not afraid to walk away. The parts that remind you that love isn't found in chasing, it's found in choosing. And you start to move differently. You start to show up for yourself in ways you once wished someone else would. You start eating better, sleeping better, creating more, living louder. You start reconnecting with your passions, your dreams, your people. You fill the space that their silence once occupied with things that feed your soul. And in doing so, you realize that the most healing sound in the world isn't a message it's the sound of your own laughter returning. And then maybe one day they'll hear it again, that laugh, that confidence, that lightness in you, and it'll hit them. It'll hit them that you were never waiting for them to return. You were rebuilding yourself. That's the moment their craving will turn into regret. They'll crave not just your presence, but your peace, the peace they couldn't create with you because they hadn't yet built it within themselves. They'll scroll through your photos, watch your progress from afar, and feel the ache of knowing they once had access to something real, but didn't have the maturity to keep it. But that ache, that's their silence catching up to them. That's the cost of not speaking when it mattered. Because silence doesn't stay empty forever. It echoes. It echoes with every missed chance, every unsent message, every unspoken truth. It becomes a weight they'll eventually have to carry. Meanwhile, you'll have transformed that same silence into strength. You'll have learned to carry yourself in a way that doesn't depend on who reaches out, but on how deeply you stay rooted in your own peace. And then when you reach that place, you begin to see life differently. You stop asking, why didn't he call? And start asking, why did I ever doubt myself? You stop questioning whether you were lovable and start realizing you were extraordinary all along. You stop waiting for closure from someone else because you've given it to yourself through growth. You begin to see that the silence that once hurt you was actually the silence that healed you. And because healing doesn't happen in noise, it doesn't happen in constant communication, it happens in stillness. In the moments when you finally face your pain, your longing, your fear of being forgotten, it happens when you sit with yourself and decide that even if no one reaches out, you will still rise. That even if no one says you're enough, you will live as though you already are. That even if someone once walked away, you won't walk away from yourself. And then that's the point, to become so anchored in who you are that no amount of silence can shake you. To reach a level of peace where you no longer need anyone to remind you of your worth. To realize that you can miss someone and still not want them back. That you can love deeply and still choose distance. That you can understand their silence and still refuse to break yours. Because maturity isn't about pretending not to care. It's about caring enough to protect your own heart when someone else doesn't. And you'll find that your silence begins to speak a language that only the self-assured understand. It says, I don't chase uncertainty, I attract alignment. It says, I don't beg for attention, I embody self-respect. It says, I'm not punishing you by being silent, I'm honoring myself by staying grounded. And that energy, that quiet confidence, that calm certainty, that's what sets you apart. That's what makes you unforgettable. Because silence that comes from power, not pain, is magnetic. And you'll start to notice how your energy shifts, how the things that once triggered you now teach you, how you can look at the person who once ghosted you and feel nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the lesson, gratitude for the growth, gratitude for the silence that became your greatest teacher. You'll understand that what once felt like rejection was actually redirection, guiding you back to yourself. And then from that space, you won't fear silence anymore. You'll welcome it because silence gives you perspective. It gives you space to breathe, to reflect, to create. It's in silence that your standards rise. It's in silence that your intuition sharpens. It's in silence that you hear the voice that says, you are no longer available for half love. That voice will become your compass, your protector, your guide. And then as you move forward, that silence will follow you, not as a reminder of what you lost, but as proof of how much you've gained. You'll walk into new relationships differently, not with fear, but with wisdom. You'll communicate from a place of clarity, not desperation. You'll love without losing yourself because you've learned that love isn't about who says the right things. It's about who shows up consistently. And you'll never again confuse absence for mystery or silence for strength. You'll know the difference between a man who's busy and a man who's avoiding. Between a man who's thinking and a man who's gone. Between a man who craves you and a man who chooses you. And when you meet the one who chooses you, you'll recognize it instantly because there will be no silence to decode, no mixed signals to interpret, just honesty, just effort, just peace. And until then, you'll walk boldly in your power, unbothered by who stays quiet. Because the moment you stopped waiting for him to reach out, you reached a level of strength he may never understand. You stopped needing closure and became it. You stopped craving attention and became enough. You stopped fearing silence and turned it into your greatest form of communication. And that's the kind of energy that no silence can ever take away.